If you are an English-speaking viewer, this father-son scene from Heated Rivalry probably sounds harsh and cold for you. But what Russian-speaking viewers hear isn't just harshness. They hear a clash between language and cultural expectation, a moment where English emotional logic is speaking through Russian words. And that is what exactly makes the scene so interesting. Hi, I am Elen, and I work with narrative stories, content, and meaning, and I love analyzing how culture shows up in language and dialects. Specific scene from Heated Rivalry, the conversation between Ilya and his father. We will be looking at it through two lenses at the same time: language and cultural expectation. Because in this scene, those two don't always align. You grew up in a Russian-speaking cultural environment, this scene immediately created a sense of dissonance for me. When we see a powerful authoritarian father figure, especially one with a military background, there is a very specific expectation baked into cultural memory. For example, raised voice, pressure, and emotional dominance.
Забудьте, кем вы были и что вы знали на гражданке. Запомните, клоуны. Здесь вы не плохие, не хорошие. Не умные, не глупые. Не художники. И вообще никто. Вы здесь даже не люди. Вы здесь говно.
This kind of hierarchical, almost militarized authority has often been portrayed not only in institutions but inside families as well, whereas the same power model is transferred from the state to the homes and families.
Кто? Я спрашиваю, кто? Отвечай, кто?
Никто, не помню. Хлыщ один.
That is the expectation many viewers subconsciously bring into this scene, and the show deliberately refuses to fulfill it. It's important to say this clearly. This authoritarian father figure is not something innately Russian. It's largely a legacy of rigid hierarchical systems inherited from the Soviet era, especially military and institutional power structures. Many people who grew up in post-Soviet cultures and countries still recognize this model instinctively. It lives in cultural memory even when society itself has already moved forward. For example, today expectations have shifted. There is much stronger demand for complex, emotionally nuanced male characters. So when a scene doesn't follow the old pattern, it can feel a little bit strange, not because it's wrong, but because it challenges an inherited expectation. Before we get into the language details, I want to address something I've seen a lot of in Russian-speaking comments. Many viewers are saying things like, I hope they had a Russian language consultant, or imply that the Russian in the show is somehow incorrect. And I actually don't agree with that. Overall, Russian in Heated Rivalry is very solid, and Connor deserves real credit for that, especially considering how rarely Russian is handled well in English language productions. What's happening here isn't about bad Russian, it's something more specific and more interesting. There are moments where the dialogue follows English structure and emotional logic too closely. Those are the moments that stand out to native speakers. And that is what I want to focus on, not to criticize the show, but to explain why those moments feel off, even when everything is technically correct. Let's speak about examples.
Тебе надо подстричься.
Да, отец.
Тебе надо подстричься. Grammatically, that's fine, but emotionally, this phrase feels neutral. If we want to highlight it in a strict hierarchical context, a Russian authority figure wouldn't speak that way. It would sound more like «приведи себя в порядок». For example, «get yourself in order». Или or «сделай что-нибудь со своими волосами». Do something with your hair. The same meaning, but very different pressure, so we can feel that Russian power speech isn't procedural now, but very judgmental.
Министр все еще хочет с тобой встретиться сегодня вечером, невзирая ни на что.
Министр все еще хочет встретиться с тобой, невзирая ни на что. This isn't wrong translation, but for me it sounds like subtitles, not spoken language. In natural Russian speech, especially within power dynamics, this would be shorter and sharper, something like «Министр все равно хочет видеть тебя сегодня». Russian spoken dialogue is hierarchical structure tends to cut emotional fat.
Это честь для меня.
Ты должно быть поощрен честью.
This is one of the most noticeable moments in this dialogue. Ты должно быть поощрен честью. In Russian, honored doesn't translate naturally as поощрен честью. That phrase simply doesn't exist in real speech. A harsher, more natural, paternal version would sound like «Ты должен быть благодарен, что тебя вообще пригласили после проигрыша Латвии». In English, it will be like you should be grateful that they still invited you after losing to Latvia. Or you should consider that as honor. Ты должен считать это честью. There are a lot of variations how we can say it. As we can see, the same meaning but grounded in how authority can actually speak in Russian.
Как ты допустил до этого?
A very typical calc problem is blame. Как ты допустил до этого? Russian has a direct translation from English, but it doesn't sound like an actual scolding. First of all, it wouldn't be до этого, just допустил. More importantly, a native speaker would restructure this thought entirely, not mirror the syntax.
Они не учат тебя дисциплине в этой американской лиге. Это не игра, а халтура.
Они не учат тебя дисциплине в этой американской лиге. The translation is okay, but this actually sounds like teaching. A Russian authority figure would more likely say something like your lack of discipline in your American league. Или просто там у вас дисциплины совсем нет. By the way, это не игра, а халтура. The word халтура. You play sloppy. Yeah, that's a very good Russian word here. That is very close to English bad work or cutting corners.
Настоящий позор – это не оправдывать надежды, которые ты показывал в детстве.
His father said, настоящий позор – это не оправдывать надежды, которые ты показывал в детстве. The real phrase in use would be like не оправдывать надежды, которые ты подавал в детстве, not показывал. Not to show, but had or demonstrated as potential. И последний пример, the last but not least.
Наш вратарь травмирован, команда не сыграна.
Сыграно? Что это за американский абсурд? Что это сыграно? Ты, капитан, ты делаешь их сыгранными.
Number 6 or 7, я уже запуталась. Команда не сыграна. Click is very American concept about chemistry, momentum, things falling into place. In Russian, the natural equivalent will be команда еще не сыгралась или они не синхронизировались. Something like that. What's important here is that the father's irritation is not only about the loss, it's about rejecting foreign logic and foreign framing. Ты капитан, ты делаешь их сыгранными. You are the captain, you make them click. When this translated literally, the Russian sounds mechanical and almost instructional. A Russian authority figure would say something closer to «Ты капитан, это твоя ответственность». You are the captain, it's your responsibility. Or «Ты должен сделать так, чтобы они играли». You must do so they play good or click. So the issue here is not about the actors or accents or pronunciation. The issue is that the dialogue is written as if the characters think in English but speak Russian. That creates a constant sense of artificially for native listeners. But what struck me the most isn't what the father says, It's how he says it. He doesn't yell, he doesn't escalate emotionally or something like that. He speaks very coldly, almost mechanically, like he's reading from a protocol. And because of that, at first, for me, this scene felt underplayed, as if the scene lacks intensity, but there is another way to read it. I'm not a medical profession, but as far as we know, Ilya's father has dementia, and after reading more information about how dementia can affect communication and behavior, this performance choice started to make sense. In some cases, people with dementia rely on repeated phrases or rigid concepts or familiar authority structures as cognitive anchors. This isn't a universal portrayal of dementia, it doesn't describe everyone with this condition, but it helps explain why the father feels emotionally flat and stuck on the same ideas like discipline, shame, authority, failure. The lack of emotional variation becomes intentional and unsettling. The illness doesn't soften the scene, it reframes it. This isn't an emotional outburst, it looks like a repetitive mechanism of power. And unfortunately, in that system, his son Ilya doesn't exist as a person, only as a function. That is why this scene feels sometimes strange for native Russian speakers, but that's not because it's poorly written. I would say that it happens because it confronts a cultural memory many viewers still carry, while refusing to play it in the way they expect, taking into account of using Russian language here. On this channel, I'll keep unpacking scenes, language, and cultural subtext, especially where different worlds collide. Join me if you would like to see more videos like that. Number... Не знаю какой. Четвертый. Что-то я устала.